So my name is Ann Barron, and I'm active in the Peace Resource Center in San Diego, and also attend many of the WILPF meetings in the San Diego chapter. We have several panelists, including Ann Hoiberg, who is the president of WILPF here in San Diego. I am looking for the other panelists who are going to be participating in this discussion about de-escalation. The Peace Resource Center has been engaged in de-escalation and techniques around trying to increase safety when we have these marches and we have these protests and rallies. So these are all about our rights, correct? You know, we have the right to protest. We have the right to assemble in the streets. But just like we talked about in the previous presentation on voting rights, just because we so-called have these so-called rights written into our Constitution, into our laws, it doesn't mean that these rights actually are protected for everyone. And so we do de-escalation not only against what we call counter protesters, but we also have de-escalation to de-escalate police and other state forces as well. We found that that has been incredibly important, especially here in San Diego, but all around the country. So we're hoping that this de-escalation training, and I'm pausing just because de-escalation happens in so many different areas, you know, individually within yourself, and we'll be looking at that, within your family, within your street, your neighborhood, your community. So it builds up and up and up. So each of us will be talking about different areas of de-escalation. I wanted to introduce our panelists, and I'm just going to go by order I see on my screen. We have Ann Hoiberg, who is the president of WILPF here in San Diego. And she and I met through Women Occupy San Diego. And I have been following her since I met her. The work she's been doing on women's rights and violence, countering violence against women, has been fabulous. So thank you for that, Anne. Also, we have Mary Hannah from the Meta Peace team. She's actually up in Lansing, not part of San Diego, but she has come down here and trained us. The Meta Peace team has a unique approach to de-escalation. They come when they're invited, and I actually participate in some of their de-escalation down in Tijuana, and she can talk more about that. And finally, also with the Peace Resource Center, we have Sister Laverne. My first nonviolence training was actually with her, so I look to her as a mentor. And we are going to get started. The conversation here, it's going to be it's coordinated. If you have questions, what we're going to ask you to do is to put the questions into the chat, and then we will answer the questions as best we can. And each one of us actually has our own skill set, so we'll take turns answering the questions, okay? So shall we get started? Laverne, did you want to kick us off?
Mary's going to do that. Do you
okay.
want me to do
oh,
Mary's
yes.
first?
Sorry, Mary. Go for it.
Well, hello to everyone. One of the things that Meta Peace Team always does is we start whatever we do, a meeting, a gathering, a peace team, training with centering, because we feel like whatever we do, we want to come from our highest selves, our best selves, and want to remember how to get there. If we practice it regularly, it makes it easier when we're in a stressful situation to get to that place where we're acting from our best selves. So if you're comfortable closing your eyes, I'm going to read just a short centering from John Lewis. It will also be on the screen in case you would prefer to read it. You are a light. You are the light. Never let anyone, any person, or any force dampen, dim, or diminish your light. Study the path of others to make your own way easier and more abundant. Lean toward the whispers of your own heart. Discover the universal truth and follow its dictates. Release the need to hate, to harbor division, and the enticement of revenge. Release all bitterness. Hold only love, only peace in your heart, knowing that the battle of good to overcome evil is already won. Choose confrontation wisely, but when it is your time, don't be afraid to stand up, and speak out against injustice. And if you follow your truth down the road to peace and the affirmation of love, if you shine like a beacon for all to see, then the poetry of all the great dreamers and philosophers is yours to manifest in a nation, in a world community, in a beloved community that is finally at peace with itself.
Thank you for that. There are different types of centering, and deeply appreciate what Mr. Lewis said. Next, we're going to pass on to Laverne, who's going to set the framing for today's workshop.
We certainly do not have to attend a march or a protest or a rally to experience escalation. It happens all around us all the time. And when we're not vigilant and self-aware, we can easily get hooked into the escalating drama before we realize it. Maybe at a barbecue with extended family and friends, or a break room scenario at work, when the voices get louder and the biases get stronger, or maybe a heated boardroom meeting. Accusations and threats can escalate things. And the one I find most interesting for me is my own monologues with what I hear being reported on the news. I'm not sure what that solves, but it certainly makes me aware of escalation. Differences of opinion, influenced and driven, in my mind, by self-serving values, narrow belief systems, seem to be the most volatile breeding ground for these escalating episodes. How we show up and choose to handle ourselves and our own biases determines whether we will help fan the flames of escalation or work to extinguish them. De-escalation shifts and diverts the focus of conflict from win-lose dualities to win-win realities. This requires a lot of self-control, a lot of patience, and certainly respect for everyone and the opinions that they have. I just leave you with something that John Lewis has challenged me with. Whatever you do, do consciously and intentionally from your highest state of being at the time. I think that's good advice. And I turn it back to our team members to continue. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you, Laverne. So as we think about all the areas that we've had de-escalation, escalation, and de-escalation, I want you to take just a minute to reflect on that episode, whether it was recent, whether it was with your family, colleague, someone in the street, the mailman, your dog, but just take a minute to reflect on what happened that started to lead to the escalation and what you could or might have done to de-escalate that moment or instance. So we'll take about 2 minutes right now to reflect on that, and then we'll start a conversation about it. Oftentimes too, journaling helps here. So if you want to write something down, that would be great. One of the techniques that we do use during de-escalation is to journal after an incident, an escalation, and to reflect upon it. The act of writing actually helps you think. So I just wanted to share that with you too, as we think about some of the more recent escalations. So to repeat the question, this is a reflection moment to think back upon a time, an incident. You're in conversation with someone, and before you know it, you're in an escalation. It's getting more and more heated. It's escalating in terms of emotion and intensity, and it could lead to violence. And we can talk more about what violence is as we continue this conversation. But to think about that moment, who were you involved with? And what are some of the techniques you could have used, or what is some way that you could have de-escalated that particular moment to dampen the tension? And I don't want to say that emotions are wrong. Your emotions are yours and you own them. But there are ways when you're working with someone, you're talking with someone, you're face-to-face with someone, to take that moment to de-escalate. And while you're thinking about that, I wanted to introduce Ann Hoiberg. I think, Ann, you're next, correct?
Thank you, Anne. I am thrilled to be a part of this panel, and I'm going to talk about peacemaking. And I wanted to go back to 2015 when I had the wonderful opportunity of attending the 100th anniversary of WILPF at The Hague. And if you look right below the sign, you can actually see a little photo of me and my colleague, Dr. D-Aker. Now, back in 2015, we did celebrate what Jane Addams and 46 other women started back in 1915, back at The Hague again. And they met to discuss how could they meet with all of the leaders of Europe to end World War I. So their mission was to end that horrific war. And so they did meet with the chancellors, the kings, what have you, of Europe. Jane Addams, when she came back to the US, met with President Wilson to urge him to do what he could do to end World War I. Well, unfortunately, the women weren't very successful. They weren't successful at all as far as ending it at that time, but it did end. And throughout the year, and promoting women as peacemakers. And I'd just like to give a little example of a peacemakers program that Dr. D-Aker created at the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice. And she brought together 4 peacemakers from throughout the world every year to hear their stories. How were they creating peace in their countries, in their communities? And I'll just give 1 or 2 examples of the peacemakers that have been coming to the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice since the early 2000s. So one woman was from Serbia. Now, Anne has been talking about the importance of words. And one of the words the woman from Serbia used was the word most. And in her language, that means bridge. Now, another peacemaker used the word muma, and that means agreement. Now, this latter woman I just mentioned was from Kenya, and she would meet with the chiefs, the assistant chiefs in her region to try to end the brutality that was going on, the killing of people. Well, she was very successful in using that word muma, agreement. We need to agree on creating peace. And she looked at the month of December, which was the most violent, and she said, we're going to make that month a peaceful month. We're going to engage Muma and agree that we will make December peaceful. And it was. And she concluded by saying, you know, the face of peace is the face of women. Now, I went to Iraq in 2004 with 9 other women from Code Pink. And our mission was to talk with women to find out how did they feel about the US invasion of Iraq. Oh my gosh, you should have heard what those women yelled at us. One woman, in fact, said, "Get out of my country. Why is the US here? What is your purpose? We're a sovereign country." So our mission was to interview these women and take the message back to our Congress, which 2 of the women did. They met with the Armed Forces Committee and the House of Representatives and told the stories of those women in Iraq who wanted the US out of their country in 2004. Well, again, we made the attempt to create peace, and again, it didn't work. But now I look at what's going on throughout the world. As the woman from Kenya said, the face of peace is women. Now, if we look at our heads of state or government throughout the world, we have 28, and they're listed here. And guess what? Those countries are by and large peaceful. What does that tell you about the importance of having women leaders of the state or of the government? Now, Estonia is unique because they have both a woman prime minister and a woman president. How glorious would that be for all countries? Okay, next slide. Now, in the next slide, we look at countries with 30% or more of women representatives. Now, these are countries that have at least 31% women in their lower houses. And if you look at these countries again, you will notice those are by and large peaceful countries. Mexico is included. That's because of their drug war caused by the US demand for drugs. So we can't really blame women there. And in Mexico, they're pursuing parity throughout all parts of the country. And close to San Diego, we now have a governor who's a woman of Baja California. So we're excited about that. We just need more women as our representatives. Here in the United States, we're at 27.4% in our House of Representatives, and we rank 67th throughout the world. So let's look at the next slide. Now, another important part is to have more women serving in our cabinets. And one of the most fun things I recall is when Justin Trudeau was asked, well, why do you have parity in your cabinet? He says, well, it's 2016, hello. And of course, Canada continues to have at least 50% women represented in its cabinet. So these are the endeavors that we all need to pursue. We need to do all we can to really encourage women to run for office. We need to train women to run for office, and we certainly need to support them. And that's our mission as far as I'm concerned. we definitely need more women representing us throughout the world. So I thank you all, and I hope you'll carry that message back to your communities and support women who will step forward and run for political office. It's crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I've been monitoring the questions that are coming up in the chat and answering them as I can, because we will be answering a lot of them in the upcoming discussion. And just to, de-escalation is a huge topic because it comes in so many shapes and forms, as does escalation. Anne was just talking about escalation on the world, on the global scale, right? So we are going to talk about the different methods of escalation, but what we wanted to do also invite you, if today is not enough for you, and it won't be because we don't have enough time, we have an hour, but we would love to have a follow-up continuation of this workshop, and we'll be inviting you to that. If you are interested, just put your email in the chat, and then we will let you know when the continuation of this workshop is. Right now, I did want to talk about common ground guidelines. And this is a technique that we use at the Peace Resource Center. It's a technique that's always used when you have two groups coming together. But we also like to use it every time we meet to remind us. So these common ground guidelines you can use for a group that meets frequently, like the Peace Resource Center, or you can use when you meet perhaps once a year. It suits all different needs. The whole purpose of this is to be very explicit about how we're going to talk to one another. What does respect mean? Because we all come to this from different perspectives. And so I wanted to share with you, you'll see it, thanks, Mary has shared it on, so you should see it on your screen. The guidelines really depend on who's in the room. So for instance, when the Peace Resource Center membership changes or the board changes, the guidelines may change too. So we go over each guideline and we talk about what it actually means. Active listening, someone had asked in the chat about empathy and when we talk about empathy. And we believe that the first approach to empathy is active listening. And active really, and we do these listening practice circles, where people talk and then you have to repeat back what they say. The active listening goes a step deeper and really listening for the emotion behind what's being said. Step up, step back is incredibly important when you're in a group, because many of us are very comfortable speaking in public and many of us are not. So we want to make sure that everyone who has something to share has a chance to say it. And sometimes just letting silence percolate allows space for someone to step up who wouldn't ordinarily step up. And the most important part, as we think also about empathy, is to suspend judgment. We are so full of judgment. And that's a cultural, that's a tendency that comes just from the way that we live in our world. You think about the news, Laverne had mentioned the news earlier. It's all about judgment. So you want to suspend judgment and you want to seek to understand. You really want to let the person speak. You don't want to interfere. You don't want to interrupt. But if you're not understanding something, we call it clarification. You can interrupt with what we call a clarifying question. What do you mean by this? Or is this what you mean? Sometimes you can clarify by repeating back what you think they mean. And that allows them also to know that you are listening, you are actively listening, which makes people feel that what they're saying is important, right? One of the hardest things is when we talk about stay on topic. That means so many different things to so many people. So when you're doing these common ground guidelines and you're talking about them at the beginning of a meeting, you want to be very explicit about what stay on topic means. For my family, staying on topic can be a far-ranging conversation because so many things are connected, right? And then but at some point we come back to the original topic or conversation. Oftentimes when we're doing these conversations or we're figuring out our common ground lines, we also sit in circle. The circle is an ancient approach used by many indigenous peoples, and it really indicates that no one person is the leader, is in charge, is the one who gets to make the final decision. We're all equal. And the crosstalk is an important part of that you are listening to who is speaking and not having your own conversation with someone else. What folks say is important. That being said, you also need to self-regulate these common ground guidelines. If you feel like someone is going off kilter, you can speak up. My favorite one for all of this, and we use this at the PRC and many of our conversations, is we say ouch, because oftentimes we make assumptions. We don't even know we're making assumptions. We make critical assumptions about other people, or we say something in a way that can be seen as judgmental. Someone in the room who's feeling that can say ouch. It's an emotional response. It's letting folks in the room know that there is an intense reaction to what was just said. You don't need to engage in a discussion about it, but it's important to acknowledge emotions, and that's part of the common ground guidelines. So you're all welcome when you have your meetings with your groups and your families, that you actually sit down and come up with these guidelines. They can be changed at will. You're not stuck with them. So those are our common ground guidelines. Thanks. So I'm thinking now, I had given you a question at the beginning, which is that you somehow got stuck in an escalating moment with somebody or in some place. And how did you de-escalate it, or were you able to? And one of the approaches is the Clara approach. And so Mary Hannah was going to go over the Clara approach with you all, and then we can have time for Q&A. Thank you.
Great. All right. So first of all, let me tell you that Clara is an approach that has many nuances, and we could take a week just to teach this skill. You're not going to get a week. You're going to get a few minutes. But what I'd like to emphasize about it is the fact that it is probably the single most used tool by people doing peace teams, unarmed civilian protection, in de-escalating a situation. And that's what this particular tool is for, is to helping de-escalate something that could be ramping up to violence. And so Clara stands for center, listen, affirm, and then if there's time, and please recognize you might not get to this, respond and reflect on what the other individual is saying and adding information to the conversation. In a situation that's highly volatile, you're probably only going to get through the first 3 steps. So let me explain that to you. And don't feel like you've failed if you didn't get to the rest of it, because if you've successfully curtailed violence, then it's worked. As I had said at the very beginning, we stress centering at MPT before everything as a daily practice, so that you know what you feel like when you're coming from your highest self and not being reactionary. So the first thing that happens when you're walking into this, potentially volatile situation, let's say you're in front of the Capitol and you're taking signatures for universal health care and somebody just loses it on you. The first thing is to take a deep breath, center yourself, be prepared for that. Things that we talk about at MPT, we always talk about the great forces of love and hate, but we try and see the great forces as love and fear. So what is that other person afraid of? And this is, if they're reacting out of fear, are they afraid that you're going to take away something they really worked hard for? Or are you going to try and challenge a belief system they've held all their life? Or are you going to tell them they're not as good at? What are they afraid of? And if you're reacting to somebody as if they are afraid, it helps you take on that onus, that sort of persona of being someone that's there to ensure them they're safe with you, that you're not there to attack them. And when you listen with your whole body. You listen with your ears, with your heart, with your gut. You interpret not only the words they're saying, but how they're saying them and why they might be saying them. And Anne was talking about clarifying questions. Clarifying questions are really important to say, you know, oh, you mean blah, 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 you know, but you have to also watch your tone. You know, a clarifying, you could say, you know, oh, you mean you've worked for 40 years is different than, oh, you mean you've worked for 40 years. Your tone, your body language, your facial expressions, especially in an era of masks, your eyes can all convey that you're listening. And then affirming, finding that common ground. You never compromise your integrity, your personal belief systems. You find something that you can agree with in what they're saying, or that you can hold up and say, I feel that way too. So if someone in that scenario of, you know, you're staffing a table for signatures for universal health care, and the person comes up and says, I worked really hard all my life to get this job that has health insurance, and now we're just supposed to hand it out to people, then you can say, wow, it sounds like you've worked a really long time. And that was a really important goal. We all really need health insurance today. You affirmed their feelings, you affirmed their perception, but you didn't agree with them on something that you don't personally agree with, okay? What happens in Clara is that if the person hears that you are affirming them as a human being, that you are not demonizing them, that they start to lose their steam, they start to de-escalate. And that's the whole purpose of this tool. If you get to a point where you feel like they're calm enough, you can respond with something in that scenario of like, well, I'm here taking signatures because I believe we all need health care, even people who can't afford to get it through their work. And if you get to a point where you can add, you would add, I know that it sounds like it's really an expensive venture, but you know, the studies coming out of Harvard show that if we had universal healthcare costs would go down because people would do preventative care. You may never get to that, especially when somebody's really angry about something. Don't worry about it. We talk about in the field doing what we refer to as la line. Listen, affirm, listen, affirm, listen, affirm. And the beauty of it is that it's respectful to other human beings and it works. So I'm going to show you a quick little video clip of us using this technique. It's based on right before the elections, and we were doing peace teams at the election polls to prevent any violence from breaking out from those elections. So you will see that. And then after you see this award-winning video, which of course you can tell we made in-house during the pandemic, we can answer any questions and then go on further. Again, this is just kind of like Ann and we all talked about, this is kind of an hors d'oeuvre of what de-escalation training can be. So share that. And
so what are you doing here? What are you writing down there?
Oh,
What's going on?
good morning. How are you?
I'm not doing too well. I'm not
Really?
doing too well. Well, I'm concerned about people like you out here. It doesn't look like you're here voting. It does. It looks like you're doing something else. And, you know, there's a candidate here who's clearly the one who should be president. And if you're here to like stand up for some sort of change in this country right now, you're part of the problem.
Oh, I can totally see what you're concerned. A lot of people have been worried about that.
What are you Antifa?
Oh.
Are you I mean, why are you out here? Why don't you just vote the right way and get your car and go home? I don't understand why people like you are out here. And I've seen a lot of you out here today. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, people have been worried, right? I mean, that
They're
is it gonna
worried
be
that
safe?
they're worried that the candidate who should be in office is not going to be anymore. Yeah, that's what they're worried about. Yeah.
Well, and we're totally nonpartisan, so you know,
That doesn't look nonpartisan to me. You know, sister, what's that all about? That's bull.
all I'm doing is saying how many people showed up.
Are you taking pictures of people too as they're coming in?
Don't have any cameras. Not allowed.
Who are you really working for? Who's paying you?
Nobody's paying me, but you seemed really concerned that that this would really happen, that somebody would try and interfere with
I
your
am
voting.
really concerned because I'm telling you, this is a fake election. This is all fake, all of this. And people like you are being played. You don't understand. I mean, even this habit right now being told I got to wear this damn mask to even be outside. That's just BS. And you know it.
This has
Everyone
been,
knows
yeah, it has
This
been
is fake,
such a difficult time. I don't, you know, 1912, whatever. I mean, that year when the last big pandemic is,
This is not a pandemic, man. This is all about politics. And you are just feeding into it. You got these ignorant people, many of them going in to vote the wrong way, and going to hell in a handbasket if that happens.
You sound like really cares about this country.
Of course I care. I'm a patriot, man. I'm not some sort of a communist Antifa or whatever the hell you are.
Oh, yeah, totally. People who love this country are what make this country great.
People like me, not people like you, girl.
Well, I am totally supportive of your right to vote, the right to free speech, the right to peaceable assembly, the right to
But you call
vote.
free speech is fake news, and you know it. You know it. This is a conspiracy, and you know it.
So you, it sounds like you keep up on the news.
I do keep up on the news. It's obvious that you don't, or you're watching MSNBC or some other weird leftist news. Of course I watch the news. Do you watch Fox News? You want to watch it there? You're going to get the truth.
So you're a Fox News watcher.
Hell yeah, because that's the real news. That's not the fake news.
So tell me about that. How do you know, like, what is it that you know about Fox that tells you that it's the real news?
Because I have half a brain. I got half a brain, sister. Yeah.
Great.
Like you don't.
It's, you know what, sometimes when I haven't had my coffee, that's exactly how I feel. But you know what, you're next in line, so I'm just gonna step back and count numbers.
Hey, I voted already, man.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Good for you. Where's your sticker?
I don't wear a damn sticker because I part that I already voted. I'm here to take care of people like you who are out here causing trouble. That's why I'm here. And in the meantime, while I've been talking to you, God only knows what's happened at this precinct.
Does it look like something has happened?
Well, I mean, I haven't had a chance to do anything else except talk with you, half-wit.
Well, if I'm keeping you from something, it's not my intention.
I've had it. I'm done. I'm
Okay.
out of here.
All right, well, have a good day, and thank you for voting.
I don't thank you because I'm pretty sure I know how you voted.
It's all right. It's good that we can live in this country and be able to do that voting.
Well, as you can see, it did not escalate to violence, right? And she looked like she easily could have gone there. You never know. And Michigan, where I'm at, has an open carry law, so you don't know who's armed and who's not. And really getting people calm down. It's not about winning an argument. It's about trying to hear what they're afraid of and meeting them on that whatever common ground you can find. So
we are running out of time, and I just wanted to share a couple of stories with you all, and then again invite you all if you want to get more training. What I do at the Peace Resource Center is I actually, when I'm in the field, I've been called cotton candy. I've been called like a bee that buzzes around. But like most women, I'm a pretty good de-escalator. I've de-escalated police in the field. And I did want to share a story of how, as a upstander at an Earth Day festival, I was able to de-escalate the Proud Boys. So someone had asked about how we deal with, the escalation during the time of Trump. And I also want to just reiterate that escalation is an American passion. That's why we talk about working on ourselves first, then our families, and then our communities. And the police have had incredible escalating powers. They carry guns. And so we do want to give quite a bit of time to talk about how you do de-escalate police. We do have the right to assemble. We have the right to air our grievances. Unfortunately, in many cities like San Diego, the police department does not agree with that, nor does the mayor. So we've had some tense situations that could have gone either way. And I have to give a big shout out to what we call upstanders. So an upstander is someone in an event that sees that something needs support. And probably for me, the most challenging time was, it was an Earth Day festival in Balboa Park in San Diego. And the Proud Boys were going through the crowd. And they were doing this probably about 6 months before the Trump candidacy was announced. They were going through the crowd and antagonizing, especially women, calling them all sorts of insults. So then they went over and started to challenge. It was in the Student Islamic Center at San Diego State University. There were two young men sitting there, and they started to challenge them. What happened next was that a group of women got on the other side of the table behind the two young men and started yelling back. So that was a no-win situation. You had two escalating forces, and you had these two young men in the middle of it. I have no idea how this happened, but what happened was I locked eyes with two other people in the crowd, and the three of us stepped forward as one group. And so what had happened, I learned later from doing some research on de-escalation, was that we had decided to delegate to ourselves the role of being upstanders, of stepping in and trying to stop the problem. All we did was the three of us stood between the Proud Boys and the table with the two young Islamic students. And they started to yell in our faces. There were 5 of them, all young men, all aggressive, yelling. I mean, spit was flying in my face from the extent of the yelling. I had a drink in my hand that I had bought, and I just took my drink and I offered it to the guy in front of me. And like instantly, the whole mood stopped. He took the drink from me and he said, "Thank you." That one moment of common shared acknowledgement broke the anger, and before we knew it, the whole situation had calmed down. The Proud Boys moved off, and the group that was shouting behind them calmed down. So we had a really good discussion then. So de-escalation can come in many different forms. You never know what the right form is to use in that situation unless you've had extensive training. And so we want to continue the training with you all and discuss how the types of de-escalation. One of the things that you can do is to Google upstander. Just Google that and you'll see a lot of great instances of how you can use 5 different techniques. They call it the 5 Ds of distraction, delegation, things like that, to take the moment and change the direction from violence to at least some form of agreement and cooperation. There's been a lot of comments flying in the chats. I hope you all are reading the chat. As someone said, and sometimes it's just best to excuse yourself and walk away from a person looking for a fight. Yes, that goes at all levels, right? From your family to your community. But sometimes when the fight is directed at someone else, there are really wonderful techniques that I just wanted to highlight. So again, if you're interested in continuing on more training around de-escalation and peace building, put your name and your email in the chat and we'll let you know when the next session is, okay? Thanks, everybody. So I wanted to just pass it over, and then we do need to wrap up. We have about 5 minutes. So Laverne, did you want to wrap up?
I don't need 5 minutes. Do we want to take a question or a comment or something?
Sure. I've been looking at the questions coming in and also suggestions that have been coming in. So there was a kind of a discussion around whether a woman is a natural peacemaker or a warmonger. And so looking at different women who have been warmongers, and several come to my mind, and I was wondering if anybody wanted to address that question. Is it the innate nature of women to be peacemakers or warmongers, or are we capable of both? Or someone?
I would say that women are capable of both. However, if we look at the current leaders throughout the world, they all seem to be peacemakers. So I think this is a trend that women are really taking on. And I'm certainly encouraging that. And I'm so optimistic that the more women we have as leaders, the better our whole world will be.
So there's been this whole conversation happening around the world about nature versus nurture, right? And so the argument I've seen, and I actually agree with this, is that women as young girls are trained to be mediators, are trained to get what they want, but through conversation and communication and building relationships. And men are not. They're, at least in Western culture, we're more trained as men to aggress, right? To take what we want, to assert our rights. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, of course, when we look at power throughout the world, men typically are the ones who do control power, whether it's economic power or combative power. So I think women, as you mentioned, need to be trained to be mediators, to really promote peace. And I think that is a trend that we're seeing right now.
I remember watching Pray the Devil Back to Hell at the Women's Museum that you're part of. Did you want to talk a little about that too?
Well, that was a wonderful film made by Abigail Disney. And at the Women's Museum of California, we showed that through Women Occupy San Diego. And it was exciting to see how women in Liberia just protested by sitting out front of where Charles Taylor was having a command performance. And they insisted that they were not going to leave until he agreed to peace. And he finally did agree. And I think that just shows the power that women can harness. And the women even threatened that they were going to strip down and really protest, but it didn't come to that. And it resulted in a Nobel Peace Prize for the president of Liberia, Ellen Sirleaf Johnson. So it all turned out well, and Charles Taylor is now serving a sentence in London. So I think it tells a lot about women, what women can accomplish, even in a situation like that. So I applaud those women and all women peacemakers throughout the world.
And their tenacity, because there was a lot of planning that went on before that event.
Yes.
Yes. And their whole goal was really they weren't going to let anyone leave that session, right? Their goal was to keep the men stuck inside until they reached an agreement. And then you mentioned that they were going to strip down, and that was such a taboo in that culture. It's so taboo to be naked. So to do that was the final act of courage of, de-escalating the situation. using their naked bodies to drive the men towards peace. So again, pray that someone asked what the name of the film was, Pray the Devil Back to Hell. It's an amazing film. And thanks for showing that. That was just a great event, great discussion. And then someone else also mentioned that we do need to learn more about negotiations. It's really not a technique. And one of the things that we're studying at the Peace Resource Center too is the role of the family. Is there a way that the family can be more democratic? Because the way we engage with children too often is very authoritarian. One of our board members actually uses common ground guidelines when she has discussions with her children, and has had great success with that. So I think we're done, but we invite you all to our next session, and we'll send you all an email. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.